Hi, everyone. Welcome to the July 13th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and today on the podcast, we're going to be bridging the gap between the end of the Belmont Spring Summer Meet and the beginning of Saratoga later this week. We're going to start by looking back at last weekend's racing from Belmont Park, which featured 3 graded stakes on Saturday, including the Grade 1 Belmont Oaks and Belmont Derby. Those are the first legs of NYRA's Turf Triple Series. We also had a few other races worth mentioning last week. That includes the Grade 3 Victory Ride from Saturday and the River Memories from Sunday, and also some pretty impressive maiden allowance winners from both of those days. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the podcast. And of course, later this week, we'll be moving up to Saratoga for the beginning of that 40-day meet. So we'll discuss some of the opening day stakes action. And who better to help me talk about all this than someone who's been covering this and will be covering it up at Saratoga for NYRA. So I'm privileged to be joined by America's Day at the Races host, Acacia Courtney. Acacia, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, David, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking with you today.
So before we get into the racing, I just want to talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff you've been up to and this transition up to Saratoga. And, there are so many jobs at the racetrack that require long hours, but from a TV standpoint, you have to be one of the busiest people on that show just because you wear so many hats. I mean, you're the host, paddock analyst, interviewer, you even fill in on Talking Horses some days. So have you had some time to kind of hit the reset button before things ramp up again?
You know what? I won't lie, David. I had a tough time getting out of bed this morning, and I drove up to Saratoga. We're recording this on Tuesday, so I drove up on Monday right after the meet, and I was really feeling it on Tuesday, just after packing the last of my things up and going up. And you're right. I really do wear a lot of hats on the show, but I really enjoyed that, and I'm really, really grateful to the team at NYRA for really investing in me and taking a chance on me, giving me some opportunities. I've always really enjoyed being in the paddock and getting a chance to talk about horses in person and looking at them, and working alongside somebody like Maggie Wolfendale and learning a ton from her has been great. And I never really anticipated myself as being a host. And I was really nervous when they first said, we want you to take over this role at Belmont. And so I'll be back in the paddock full time for Saratoga. I'll be a fill-in host a couple of the days, but Lafitte Pinkai and Greg Wolf will be the hosts during Saratoga. But it's a role I've really come to love, and it was not something, again, that I expected. And when I kind of go off and do other things, I kind of miss being in the driver's seat as the host. So it's something I've really enjoyed. It's been an exciting new challenge for me, and I'm really grateful for that, and having the opportunity to grow in my craft as well.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about watching the show up at Saratoga. They bring in some of that additional talent, and you get so many different perspectives on the show and see the racing from different angles, from different people. But for you up at Saratoga, like, how long does it take to kind of prep for a show as far as the handicapping goes? I don't know if you talk to connections beforehand or do a lot of reviewing of your notes.
It's a lot about the notes, especially in Saratoga when we have these maiden races or, big allowance races. A lot of people are pointing to that. And one of the things that I really rely on so much, even when I'm hosting, I take notes on things I see off the screen or things that I hear a reporter say down in the paddock, or trip notes that I immediately recognize. So even when I'm hosting, I'm taking notes on the horses because it really helps when you see those horses the next time out. So no matter what role I'm in, I rely on my trusty iPad, and I would be lost without it because it's such a useful tool to be able to look back and say, oh, wow, this is what I thought about this horse last time. And I'm seeing such a big change today, for good or for bad. And those are the biggest key things for me that really help in handicapping, whether it's doing daily picks, like filling in on Talking Horses, or just trying to have an idea looking at them in the paddock. So I think watching replays is huge and is a must do for any handicapper. I really watch any workouts that are available on XBTV as well. That's a benefit with being in Saratoga, that you're going to have access to a lot more of those, both the training track and the main track. And especially if it's a younger horse coming in, I'll always look up the pedigree page. I'll always probably go back a couple generations to see as well. And I will watch the sales workout if there is one. So any information that I can kind of get my hands on, I try to look at before I go in and see them in the paddock.
Yeah, and as a viewer of the show, that's something that we really appreciate. I mean, watching you on the show, it's always clear that you put in the work. I mean, you always have a nugget of information or some insight into whatever horse comes up in conversation. So it's really nice to see that. Now, Saratoga this year, it's going to look different from last year's meet. So, what are you most looking forward to this year as you go up for this 2021 Saratoga meet?
Well, I think like everybody, we're just excited to have that energy back. Last year, and I always say this with a disclaimer because I was more than anything just so grateful that Saratoga happened last year. I think that there was a period where we really wondered if the Saratoga meet was going to take place with COVID-19. Were we going to just stay at Belmont for safety reasons throughout the summer? So I was really grateful that it happened. I was happy that we were able to have owners there. But without sounding selfish, because I was one of the ones that was privileged to be on the track every day, when I got home at night, I just felt so drained because you were trying to bring all of that energy to the people watching because you knew that that's all it was. It was people watching our show. They couldn't be there in the backyard. They couldn't be on the rail cheering or at the paddock bar. And it felt like you kind of had to put everything into it to make that energy. Whereas I feel like this summer we're going to have so much great energy to feed off of. And that's what Saratoga is about, is getting a chance to catch up with people that you haven't seen in a while, newer fans enjoying the races, and people that are just excited to be there. And I think that that's going to be double what it usually is this summer.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who didn't get up to Saratoga at all last year, and I think that's the truth for a lot of people, it kind of feels like last year was almost a lost season. I mean, we got to appreciate it via TV, and I mean, thanks to the programming that America's Day at the Races does, you get to see almost the entire meet on whatever channel you watch that on, whether it's on YouTube or the Fox channels. But it's not the same as being there in person. So I know that I'm looking forward to getting back there for some of the weekends this meet. Now, Saratoga's a busy time. Do you have like a routine or ritual that you do on the dark days to try to kind of decompress, or do you find yourself even working on those days?
There's definitely some work involved too. As you've probably noticed, I like to be over prepared, if anything. So I'm always kind of looking ahead as far as what I can possibly prepare for leading into the week. But I think this year we're going to have an even busier social calendar than last year, which is not something that really happened. I do think it's really important to at least take a little bit of time just away from racing. And it's not that I don't love it, but it's just kind of a mental refresh because 8 weeks and that's all you're kind of focusing on. By the end of the meet, I think it was summed up perfectly. Everybody's so excited to get there at the start of Saratoga and then so excited to leave at the end because you're just constantly going and constantly being busy. I grew up a dancer, so exercise is always a really big thing for me. So on the dark days, I try to do yoga or go to a workout class or run in the park or something like that. So that's kind of a reset. And my fiance Miguel Clement and I were saying we kind of need like a social calendar on the fridge so that we can just cross off a day where we just take time, like just the two of us, and we just go to the pool or watch TV or something. Just a little bit of a reset time. I think that's really important mentally.
Yeah, totally. Because if you're just in the work 24/7 every day, you can burn out over that 40-day meet. So you do want to take those moments to kind of reset your brain and get ready for the new week. Now, before we move into the racing and do a little bit of recapping, I know you have so much else going on aside from the America's Day at the Races program. And I do want to ask you a little bit about the nonprofit organization you run, Racing for Home. I've been following a little bit on social media. I saw that you were doing some fundraising a few weeks ago for Turco Bravo and Older Gelding that I was a big fan of on the racetrack. So just talk a little bit about that and how you started that and what you've got going on currently.
Well, Turco Bravo is a great example of a horse that we've been able to partner with some past connections in order to get him retired. He was 12 and still racing up at the Finger Lakes, and past the age of 10, you can't race at the Naira tracks. So some of his previous connections, Dave and Carolyn Canizzo, who had him in their barn for quite a while, they have a farm just outside Saratoga, and they've been trying to get him to retire him. So we were able to fundraise the funds in order to pay yesterday for the claim to claim Turco Bravo to retire him. And we're actually going to be able to present that check to the Canizzos this weekend, which we're really excited about because they've opened their hearts. And I don't know if anybody saw on Twitter the video of Dave welcoming Turco Bravo back to the farm and their daughter, who is just so excited to see him. And it's so great when former connections step up for a horse that gave them so much. And he's going to have such a wonderful life. And I'm really, really excited for that. We also just welcome back another war veteran, so to speak, that many on the NYRA circuit will remember, Celtic Chaos, who's a New York bred stakes winner. He just arrived at the farm with my mom, and he has some injuries after racing, but he's going to have rehab with my mom, who's really, really talented at rehabbing horses off the track and getting them sound and getting them ready for a new career. So Celtic Chaos is starting the next phase of his life. So that means we have now 13, I believe, horses in our care with Racing for Home. Turco Bravo went right to his new home at the farm with the Canizzos. But we are a 501c3 that my mom Sherry and I started back in 2011. And in 2019, we were accredited by the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, which was a big goal of mine to know that we meet those high standards and we're doing it right. So everything is tax deductible. We are monitored by the TAA, and we do receive some funding for them. But it is a labor of love for sure. And we get a lot of horses that even some other aftercare organizations won't take because they're not adoptable right away. They need a lot of rehab time, Celtic Chaos being a perfect example. And we really do that because it's something that we both really care about. My mom's been involved in horses her whole life, as have I. And thoroughbreds have given me the world and more than I ever could have imagined. So for us, it's again a labor of love, but we also think it's our responsibility and the most rewarding thing I've been involved in.
It's really awesome, and I think there's so much more awareness these days,
Yeah.
especially with the advent of social media, of what's happening to these thoroughbreds after the racetrack. So it's great to see these stories of thoroughbreds that the betters and the fans have come to love and have gotten so much pleasure from. To see these stories of them being rehabilitated for second careers, so that's really great and excellent to see you getting involved in that work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's actually what got me into racing in the first place. I was not involved in horse racing itself. I was more involved in getting some horses off the track. And I said, I really think I should learn where these horses are coming from. And that's how I got swept up in the world of racing. So now I have my own organization. I'm on the advisory board of the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation as well. So very much a big, big piece of the sport for me and very close to my heart.
Well, let's dive into some of the racing from last week at Belmont Park. And it was a pretty stacked Saturday card with those three graded stakes events and the two grade ones. And let's begin by talking about both of those grade one events, the Belmont Oaks and the Belmont Derby. I think for a lot of people, the performance by Santa Barbara in the Belmont Oaks was the one that really caught the eye because the turn of foot that she displayed coming through the stretch once Ryan Moore finally found a seam for her was pretty impressive.
Oh, I very much agree. Of the two Coolmore runners we saw that day, I think that she takes the cake as the performance of the afternoon. And kind of going back to the notes and the preparation, I had watched her races that I could access in Europe, and she was coming out of Group Ones, and we saw Thundering Knights in the New York running second behind Mean Mary. They met in the Group One Pretty Polly last time out, and I just said, "Wow, this horse looks like she just has so much substance to her." And then I came and saw her in the paddock before the Belmont Oaks, and she almost is built like a colt. And for a horse that's that big, especially a European filly, who will typically see European horses that come to the U.S. be of a lighter frame because they run on that softer turf courses over in Europe that they tend to skip over a little bit easier. So you're not usually going to see one that's built like that coming from Europe. So that was a surprise. And then how light she was on her feet and that acceleration that she had, being such a big filly and being able to go between horses like that, a special performance. And Ryan Moore afterwards was very to the point, and he just said she's a class above these, which I've got to agree with him. She really was.
Yeah, the margin of victory was only a half a length, but that hardly tells the whole story. That was just quite a turn of foot from her. And it looked for a brief moment at about the quarter pole like he was going to be in real trouble and maybe not get out of that hole. But Ryan Moore, he's such a professional and he showed such poise, just not panicking, waiting for things to open up. And they finally did. And he was able to shoot on through. I thought the American horses in this race actually held their own fairly well. Cone Lima, who had just gradually stepped forward since the winter at Gulfstream, running some faster speed figures. She was the winner of the Wonder again with a good trip, but she made her own good trip again in this race and was able to hold on for a second with a pretty respectable performance.
She really did. And she's one that I've always kind of wondered how good she really is. And she's really stepped forward in her last couple of starts. Flavian Pratt rides her really well too, putting her on the front end and getting her relaxed. She's a very quirky filly and she's really improved since being in Todd Pletcher's care, but she always stays with the pony away from the rest of the field. She's kind of handled with kid gloves and tried to keep calm because she has those quirks and that nervous energy. And I think Flavian really does a good job of channeling it and getting her relaxed on the front end. But to be able to hold on, going a distance, that was a big question, I think, for her and a couple of the other American runners. That really made her, in my mind, take a big step forward in the division.
As somebody who likes to analyze trips a lot, I think both of these races are ones where you can kind of look back and reassess things and talk about some horses that didn't have their best shot. And I think the story of both of these races was just how slow the early pace was. And a lot of the American riders try to really kind of, calm their horses down on the backstretch and get things as slow as possible when they're going these longer distances, like a mile and a quarter. And that negatively affected horses like Gam's Mission and Plum Ali, who were just kind of never in position to really make their run. So I would imagine their connections are going to be looking for some races, hopefully to have some more pace in the future.
That's always the question in New York, isn't it? What kind of pace are we going to get? And I agree. Plum Ali, she actually broke okay, and then she is the type that Joelle Rosario tends to take back and she settles. And she settled nicely. She was last early on. Gam's Mission never really got a chance to save much ground early in the race either. And she is the type, Gam's Mission, that is, that's that big scopy filly that I think wants the distance. I wonder if Plum Ali wants to go a bit shorter than the mile and a quarter. Pedigree would say that she wouldn't even want to go the mile and a 16th or as far as she has gone. But she's physically developed quite well. But I would wonder if maybe she'll kind of go back to a little bit shorter distances. It's tough. You want to be involved in these high level races, and the Belmont Derby and Belmont Oaks are so prestigious in the way that the Turf Triple and Turf Tiara have grown. And when you have a tough trip and things are kind of stacked against you from the beginning, plus you have the quality of a horse like Santa Barbara, it's tough to really try and make your mark for any of the American runners, I think, in these races.
Now, in the male division of this race, the Belmont Derby, which was run two races later on Saturday, same distance, very similar pace scenario as they both went pretty slowly in the early going and through the middle portion of the race, but things fell apart a lot more in the Belmont Derby, and that allowed some of the Europeans to really shine with their stamina coming through the stretch. And it was a very different kind of ride for Ryan Moore on Bolshoi Ballet than it was on Santa Barbara. This was not a handy horse like Santa Barbara is. You had to really ask this one to go, and he finally does hit top gear.
He was in an all-out drive for a prolonged stretch, and I know that Ryan said that he was kind of there when he asked him, but he is a type of grinding running style horse. And it was funny because I was watching the race and I said, wow, Ryan's moving early on him, but he could sense that there wasn't much pace and he got him to the outside. There was no getting caught in traffic this time around with Bolshoi Ballet. And I thought Hard Love, who was the American who was setting the pace, was disappointing in this effort. He was the one that I thought was going to be the strongest of the American runners. Overall, I thought, as far as the U.S. runners did go, Chellis ran a very good race for Rusty Arnold. But once again, the class of both rider and horse did prevail in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, the big question in both of these races was how would the Americans stack up to these proven class horses coming from the Aidan O'Brien stable? And the fillies actually held their own a little bit. I thought that the Colts didn't quite so much here. We had some no-shows, and maybe it was the turf course having some give in it. A lot of the Americans aren't really used to that. And Hard Love just didn't really seem to have much of an excuse, like you were saying. He just kind of fell apart. Maybe he didn't get the distance. Maybe he didn't like the going. Maybe something was ailing him on the day, but he didn't really show up here. But you can kind of say the same thing about standout du jour. He didn't really back up that performance from Churchill Downs. So I think that allowed those 2 euros to dominate in this race, despite the fact that it came back a little bit slower than the Belmont Oaks.
It did. Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. And I think, like you said, the margin of victory for Santa Barbara didn't really tell the story. She was really dazzling. But overall, on paper, going into it, I thought that the Colts race looked like it might be a little bit stronger. But I very much agree that the fillies overall put on a better show. And Bolshoi Ballet, he did what he had to do. He seems like he's that kind of horse. But I think it was also a poetic day given the fact that he's by Galileo and became the 92nd greater Group 1 winner for that sire who passed away that morning. So I thought that that was a special way to end the day. And I also thought it was very interesting just to reflect on these two races, how in the past we have seen Aidan O'Brien send nice horses here, but he really stepped it up with the quality of what he sent coming to the US, and obviously the purse money of these two races versus what you're going to get in Europe, prestige aside, I'm sure was very appealing.
Yeah, Andy Serling was talking a lot about this on the show, how like really hammering home the fact that Aidan O'Brien has not brought horses of this quality in the past. And, I was looking at some of the stats in Formulator, kind of sorting horses by the prices that they've gone off in the past. And over the past 5 years, these are the two shortest prices that he started in the United States out of something like 115 runners. So I think that just kind of highlights the fact that these horses were of a much higher quality than ones that he's brought to these races in the past. And we'll see if they come back for some future starts in this Turf Triple Series. I think that especially if Santa Barbara returns, she'd be pretty formidable for the American Connection. So I'm sure some of them have mixed feelings about that, whether they return,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of prize money on the line. So it's always nice to see these European connections come over.
It does, I think, add to the prestige of the race too, to have more of a European influence in there, especially if the Americans do well. I think it elevates the quality of the race and being able to have some of that diversity in there. And I did speak to MV Magner after Santa Barbara's win, and I asked him if the Saratoga Oaks was on the table, and he said, "Why not?" So we'll see.
Yeah, they'll both go back to Ireland, I believe, in the
Mhm.
meantime, but we'll see if they decide to ship back over for these races. And I'll just mention, as we move on, the Santa Barbara got a 119 time Form US speed figure. That's a number, looking at how Craig did the pace figures, that was bumped up a little bit because she really came home quickly. And we do give a pace bonus for those speed figures when horses have a quick finishing speed in these turf routes. Bolshoi Ballet got a 111, so 8 points lower than Santa Barbara. So not quite as high quality as the filly. That 119 that Santa Barbara got is the kind of number that really would make her competitive against some older horses in that division. So we'll see if they decide to come back and who wants to face them if they do. The other graded stakes from Saturday at Belmont Park was the Grade 3 Victory Ride, sprinting on the dirt, that was sandwiched between those two turf stakes. And I think as much as it's a story about the winner, super sensational, this race also, I think you have to focus on the no-shows, because the horses coming out of the Jersey Girl just had absolutely nothing to offer.
They did, and I spoke to Maggie Wolfendale about this afterwards because she was out there on the track. I was off this race, and she said both Miss Brazil and Australasia coming out of the Jersey Girl on this day for the victory ride just didn't seem to be themselves. And I think that that's really kind of the key to it as well. Yes, they both had poor performances, but that's something that you can watch moving forward. So then next time if we see them, you say, okay, wow, they look like they did in the Jersey Girl, like they were acting well, that good energy. Maybe things are back to normal today. So that's where kind of knowing a horse and keeping those notes and following up, I think, is so helpful. It was also interesting that the next day, Bella Sofia, who had scratched out of the victory ride and had run in an allowance on Sunday, just absolutely crushed what appeared to be a fine allowance field. So the Jersey Girl, I think, is a race that you can still think makes sense moving forward. And it'll be, do Miss Brazil and Australasia get back to themselves, a sort of thing. So they were no shows, but super sensational. Absolutely showed up. And with her and maybe Bella Sofia leading into the test, that could make things really interesting for Saratoga.
No, I'm really glad you brought up the Sunday race as well, because I kind of had the same questions coming out of the victory ride. Maybe the Jersey Girl wasn't as strong a race as the speed figures and all of us trip handicappers thought it was, because Australasia looked so impressive in that race. But clearly, especially in the case of Australasia, something was just ailing her. Something was wrong this day, because she just never even hit top gear right after she got out of the starting gate. You could see that Joelle Rosario was trying to motivate her, and she just never got into a full stride. So something clearly was not right with her. So I'd be willing to give her a pass if she's able to
Me too.
come back and start training better coming into the next start, because whether it was an illness or if there's some minor soft tissue injury that they didn't discover right away, something was not right with her in this race. So we'll see if she comes back. But I agree with you. Super sensational. I mean, despite the fact that the race got a little easier when that main competition didn't show up, she still ran her race, and it seems like she's really developed into a one-turn sprinter.
I think so. And, it's funny. She had traffic in the 8 bells, and I think Obligatory is a talented runner, as is Day Out of the Office. But she had been running in those longer races prior where she was kind of lost in the shuffle and came in as maybe looking like she was a bit off form. Sometimes with these horses at this stage when they're three, we see it often with horses going into the Kentucky Derby, and then they kind of find themselves back going shorter distances or maybe a different surface. Whitmore becoming a top sprinter is a perfect example. I think a lot of people forget that he ran in the Kentucky Derby as a 3-year-old. But I think we see it with the fillies too. You have a 3-year-old only once. You try to get them on that Kentucky Oaks, Kentucky Derby trail. And with a horse like this, who had run well, had run fine early on as a 2-year-old and early 3-year-old. But I think now they've kind of taken a step back and figured out exactly what she wants to do. And she really made, I think, the division very interesting as a new face.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Bella Sofia on Sunday. I think it makes sense to talk about that race in tandem with this one, because these horses are looking ahead to the test going 7 furlongs, that grade one event at Saratoga. And boy, was Bella Sofia impressive. I mean, she wasn't beating the same kind of field that she would have faced if she had started in the victory ride, but that was a really fast pace that she was involved in. I mean, she put away that Clement runner who was off the layoff that she was dueling with early, and that one faded pretty badly, and horses that were second and third closed from way back in the pack. So, I mean, she beat the dynamics of the race, and she earned a really nice speed figure. I think the buyer for Bella Sofia was a 94. So a very impressive performance, and one that I think they have to step up in class next time.
I very much agree. And she, to me, was most impressive because not only was she dueling in a fast pace with a filly that's very quick, and faded after after that pace, but if you go back and watch the race, Jose Ortiz never asked her. He shook the reins at her once, and he never even moved his riding crop or moved his position, just shook the reins, and she accelerated and pulled away again. To me, that was the most impressive part. And it's a scary thought to think just how good she is because she was never even asked after dueling. In that very, very fast pace. She is one that has really backed it up. She faced older in her debut and won by over 11 lengths, and then finishing second in a stake next time out, I think proved that she certainly does belong. This was also a win against some older horses like Rubies in Time, Fierce Lady, who were coming out of New York Bred Stakes competition and had many more wins and many more starts. This is a very, very talented filly, and she did it really easily too.
Yeah, she's definitely the best daughter of Awesome Patriot that I've ever seen. I really can't think of any other progeny that I've seen by that sire. And her dam sire is Consolidator, just a really obscure pedigree, but boy, she can run. So yeah, I'm excited to see what she can do in the test next month if that's where they decide to go with her.
Yeah, and it did seem like the owners afterwards were keen on giving the test a try. And I know that she has only a couple of starts to her name, but after that performance, I think that she will actually be a big contender in that race.
Now, the one other stakes race from last week at Belmont took place on Sunday. That was the mile-and-a-half River Memories for the fillies and mares. A few scratches in this race, but I think that the main body of the field consisted of the horses that were going to be the main players in the race. And it was kind of funny to watch this race unfold because when you handicapped it, there was no speed in the race. So it was really going to be a rider's race to see who was going to send to the front end. And it felt like one of the Clement runners was likely to go to the lead, but you didn't really know which one. And it turned out that Muda Makina was the setter under Joel Rosario, and it allowed the eventual winner, Call Me Love, to get that perfect trip sitting in behind.
She did, and it was funny looking at it on paper. I thought it would be the other way around, and even Junior Alvarado, who wrote "Call Me Love," said that he thought it was going to be the other way around. But after the break, is "Call Me Love" is a type of horse that seems so promising when she first came here to the U.S. I mean, she ran second behind Rushing Fall. She was second and neck behind Starship Jubilee over Sister Charlie. She was facing the top class fillies and mares of the division. And it seems like it had never really come to fruition, the hopes in what she had done in that company. Last time she was really game over a nice, but certainly not the top of the level Chad Brown duo. But what she did in this stake, I think, really showed that she's put everything all together. She did get a great trip closing, but you could see early on that, and she is an energetic type of mare. She gets really on her toes prior to the races. And when she broke and Junior Alvarado settled her back off the pace, she got into a really nice rhythm. And then when he tipped her out, had a lot of horse left. And I think that that was really something good to see her put things together. Muda Makina setting the pace. She held on well, but Virginia Joy for Chad Brown did nab her for second. And I thought that that one, coming out of the grade 2 New York, was perhaps the class. And she's one that I still think has some ability as well. But I thought the top three all ran very well in a nice final stake of the meet.
Yeah, they all put in nice performances. It was a really exciting race to watch because coming to the eighth pole, it looked like there were 4 horses out of the 5 that were all in the mix, and even 3 coming right down to the wire that all hit it together, with Call Me Love making the final move. And often making the last move is the right move in these longer turf stakes when they don't go that quickly up front. And yeah, like you said, she must have been a kind of a frustrating horse when she first came over, because she had that big effort first off the layoff when she was second to Rushing Fall, and it's like she never quite got back to it and was unsure what the right distance for her was, but it seems like she's putting it all together now. And, Junior Alvarado, he's not the perfect fit for every horse, but with a runner like this that wants to be in the bridle and needs to be covered up, he's just so patient and he's willing to wait in behind horses. And once he gets out, he's able to produce these horses at the right time. So he just seemed like he was a perfect fit for this filly, and hopefully she can keep going on this path.
Yes, I certainly hope so too. And I agree about Junior. I think that he, after having a spill during this meet and having a concussion scare after that, and taking a little bit of time to kind of get back to riding in top form, I think that the way that he ended the meet was on a really positive note, and great for him. He's such a good person. And he and his agent actually brought donuts this morning to the Clement Stable staff after wrapping up the meet with the stakes win. So it just shows you the character, the kind of person that he is as well.
Now, as we finish up the recap, I just want to talk about a few more races in addition to those stakes, some maiden and allowance races. We already mentioned Bella Sofia on Sunday, but there was another allowance race on that Sunday card right before Bella Sofia ran that was won by the deep closer Montauk Traffic. And this is just such a fun horse to watch because he clearly knows how he wants to run the races. Eric Cancel was trying to keep him in touch with that slow pace early, and he wanted no part of it. He just takes himself out of the races, but boy, does he produce some finish in the stretch.
He was so far back, and he always is. And that had been the biggest question about this race. And yet we saw John Velasquez aggressive with Endorsed. I thought perhaps it might be a horse like Yodelier, who used to show speed and just hasn't lately. But Endorsed was sent early on with Jalen Journey, who was kind of the confirmed speed on paper. And I think it was the right thing to do with a horse like Endorsed, and not let Jalen Journey get comfortable on the front end. But that did give a little bit of pace for Eric Cancel to run into on Montauk Traffic, who he's such a cool horse to look at too. He's got that really gray roan look and the flaxen tail, and he's out of the picture early on and just came flying late. You could see just how dirty the front of him and Eric was. He made it an exciting finish, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's a horse that they tried to stretch out a couple times over the winter, but it seems like he really is at home as a closing sprinter. And his last 3 races, if you watch them all, it's like he's just shot out of a cannon at the top of the stretch. I mean, he builds up so much speed at a time when horses are typically slowing down coming past the quarter pole. So that late run looks even more impressive. And, I don't know if he's going to turn out to be a graded stakes winner or not. I mean, I guess they might move him up after this, but he's just a really fun horse to watch run.
I agree. I like him. I really have uh, those late closers that have such a strong kick. They can be frustrating because sometimes you're at the victim of the pace scenario or not having anything to run at, and they just take themselves so far out of it. But when they finish up like Montauk Traffic did this weekend, it makes it really exciting, and I do enjoy races like that.
Now, back to Saturday's card, there were a couple of impressive maiden winners, one of which was a 2-year-old in the first race of the day. This was an off the turf affair, but the one MTO in the field was the winner of the race, Dr. Jeff. And, a lot of these maiden races that we've seen for the 2-year-olds at Belmont have come back with speed figures that are pretty uninspiring. I mean, you figure that they're saving the better 2-year-olds to debut up at the Saratoga meet, but this was one of the more impressive ones that we saw down at Belmont.
I agree. Rudy Rodriguez had a very good weekend between Bella Sofia and Dr. Jeff. And this call, it was the main track only. The race was the only one of the day taken off the turf. So it certainly worked out for him. But he's just such a handsome horse that really poured it on track. I think he's going to be effective stretching out a little bit too. And sometimes you have to think about it as a lot of people are waiting to debut the better 2-year-olds at Saratoga. A lot of owners prefer winning at Saratoga, but when you win at Belmont, a win's a win for sure. And especially when you do it as nicely as Dr. Jeff did, and then you have some opportunity to step into some deeper waters when you're moving forward. It's a $90,000 maiden special weight. So there's certainly nothing wrong with winning that and taking advantage of being a main track only, which I think that we see some trainers like Rudy Rodriguez being very adept at doing and looking for places where you can enter as an MTO. But I thought the way that Dr. Jeff did it, definitely one of the more impressive 2-year-old debuters. Obviously, Wesley Ward's had some really fast ones that have already been successful in stakes company, but I thought that this was one of the better ones that we saw at the Belmont meet.
Yeah, and he's one of those horses that was geared down at the wire. And, people always say when you see these horses with the rider standing up across the finish line, oh, we could have run so much faster. That's not always true, but I think this is a case where Joel Rosario just basically slowed this horse to a canter across the wire. I mean, he could have won by a good 6 lengths. So, I mean, he got a 78 buyer for this and a 99 TimeformUS speed figure, which, it's not going to win stakes yet. But I mean, if he could step forward just a little bit, he would be competitive in stakes races off those speed figures. And you would imagine that he could have run faster based on how easily he won this race. So he's definitely an exciting prospect.
He is, and I think that he had a couple horses behind him, like Fort Ticonderoga, who will improve next time out and getting on the turf. So he's going to have to face next time, most likely, dirt meant horses and maybe others that have a little bit more foundation, maybe coming from out of town too. So the waters will get deeper, but it's exciting to think about the future.
And the fastest maiden winner that we saw on Saturday was Water's Edge, who is a 3-year-old New York bred who was very impressive, winning against a salty field of New York breds. And we've seen a lot of these in this 3-year-old New York bred maiden division throughout the Belmont meet. Some really nice winners like River Dog, who came back and won the Mike Lee, Big Bobby, who won out of that same race, American Revolution, who actually beat Water's Edge when he made his debut. And now Water's Edge came out of that race to break his maiden here, and he got a 92 buyer and a 111 TimeformUS speed figure. I mean, he's one that could step up into New York bred stakes.
I agree. Dave Donk has had some really nice maidens this meet too. He had a really nice 2-year-old run well. This horse is typically, it's not a barn that we look for first time out. And I was actually in the paddock for his debut behind American Revolution, who American Revolution was the horse that had faced Mandaloon in his debut at Keeneland. So he's, I think, really quality now with Todd Pletcher. Water's Edge, I kept looking at him. I was like, he was really going to do well after a race, but he's just such a good looking, well put together horse. And he took a huge step forward second time out as well. I think that the 2 maiden races that he ran in were the saltiest New York bred maidens that we'd seen at the meet as well. So that makes it exciting. And he has natural speed as well in the way that he ran in his debut. I think that that's a big benefit. If he rematches with American Revolution, that could be fun to follow too. As American Revolution also is the type of horse that tends to drift out a little bit, and he was kind of getting out a little bit when dueling with Water's Edge in their debut. So I think that taught Water's Edge a lot too, and learning from his first race to take a big step forward. Future looks bright for this colt.
Yeah, definitely. And there'll be some stakes later in the year, even against the older horses that these ones could step up in. So definitely nice to have some of these 3-year-old New York bred prospects running the kind of speed figures that this quartet of runners has been. So I'm interested to see where they go in the future at Saratoga and even down the line when we have some of those state bred programs at Belmont. Now, looking ahead to the rest of this week at Saratoga, knowing you, I'm sure you've already done a lot of work on the opening day card, and we've got a pair of stakes there, both grade 3 events, the Quick Call and the Schuylerville. Wesley Ward is going to have the favorites in both of them. The Quick Call, Golden Pal, is likely to be a substantial odds-on choice, and rightly so. He looked so good when he was a 2-year-old. Now, I don't know exactly what the story was about why he missed the Royal Ascot meet, because I know that's what was likely to be the goal for him as a 3-year-old, and now he's making kind of his belated 3-year-old debut. But if he returns as the same horse that he was as a 2-year-old, this field's going to be in trouble.
Yeah, he doesn't even really need to improve that much coming back as a 3-year-old, as Wesley's other runner that's entered, Fauci, ran in the stake at Monmouth on Sunday. So it looks like he will be represented by only Golden Pal, which I think is fine representation. And I was curious because I had been kind of following him, and this horse Golden Pal had been training down in at Palm Meadows in South Florida in February, March, where Wesley is based over the winter. And then he stopped from early March to June when he came back at Churchill. And I am assuming that that means that something happened, that he had to go to the farm or to be given some time off, because you would assume that in that training in March, that would be leading up to a race like at the Royal Ascot meeting. So but that aside, he came back and has been working really fast at Churchill Downs as well. Even a turf workout in 47 and 2 for on the turf for 4 furlongs. He's a very, very quick horse, and he showed that he could overcome a far outside post in a turf sprint going 5.5 furlongs at Keeneland and be one of the perhaps most impressive winners on the Breeders' Cup weekend. We have seen Wesley Ward give a lot of time in between 2 and 3-year-old seasons too. So given what he's facing, I'm not overly concerned about the layoff, but I'm very curious and anxious to see him.
Yeah, he's a horse that Wesley Ward's been talking up for a long time, kind of really hammering home the point that he believes he's one of the fastest horses that he's had. And, Wesley's not afraid to pick his spots with these horses. I mean, I think of horses who had careers like Bound for Nowhere and Kamari. They don't run every month or every 2 months, but he brings them back off layoffs constantly and they keep performing well. So hopefully Golden Pal fits into that same mode, that same pattern. And he's a horse that just seems to tower over this field. I mean, even when you look through it, unless Jackson Traveler handles the turf, and he's got plenty of speed figures on dirt and synthetic that would make him a contender, but the other horses, they just seem a little bit up against it against a horse of the quality of Golden Pal.
I agree. And when you look at Jackson Traveler, he probably lost the race in the Chick Lang 2 starts back when he was not as aggressive as the other Steve Asmussen runner in there, Mighty Mischief. However, he has speed. I just don't think that he has any chance of trying to outfoot a horse like Golden Pal, who was just so fast. Looking back at the Skidmore at Saratoga last year, when they opened the gate, he had already put like 4 lengths on the rest of the field. He's just so quick early on, and I think that's really his best weapon, and he's able to sustain it as well.
Now, Wesley Ward also has the favorite in the traditional opening day feature at Saratoga, the Grade 3 Schuylerville, going 6 furlongs for the 2-year-old fillies. And Happy Soul has been an impressive winner of her last couple starts at Belmont, winning both of them by 11 plus lengths. Though I'm sure you remember what that Astoria field looked like. And let's just say it was not of the quality of the field that she's going to face in the Schuylerville. So I think even though she's got that stakes win under her belt, she's getting a real class test here.
She is. I agree. She didn't beat anything that day, though she did it very impressively. John Velasquez was hands and heels. He was still asking her a little bit down to the wire to keep her focused. And, I think that's a good thing with the 2-year-old filly, too. We often will see horses kind of eased up at the wire when they win by open lengths, but to kind of keep them focused on their job so they don't get in a habit to pull up too quick by the time they get to the wire. And Happy Soul's been impressive on both of her starts. However, I think actually the inside 2 are the ones I'm most intrigued by. Pretty Birdie was really impressive for Norm Cassie in her debut at Churchill. And I know it was a wet track, but Mainstay for Butch Reed in her debut at Monmouth had been really highly talked about. And I thought that she was just so impressive in that performance. she's going to be interesting. And it is Saratoga. We will have some rain over the next few days. I'm hoping it's not too much on opening day. But those two I thought were really impressive in their debuts and could absolutely step forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. A mainstay being that half sister to Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies winner Vequist, and stretching out from 4.5 furlongs to 6, and your second start is no small task. But she was so impressive finishing that race. I agree. And just looking at her work tab since that, I mean, they have not gone easy on her in the morning. Maybe she's just a naturally quick horse, but it's unusual to see a horse with a 45 and change 4 furlong workout on their card coming into a stakes like this. So clearly, that she's been tearing up the track in the morning. So we'll see if they get that rain and she gets her preferred kind of surface. But I think regardless, she's a contender in this race. And Pretty Birdie, she is a Mary Lou Whitney bred on both top and bottom, as she's actually out of a sire or by a sire who's from that foundation mare for Mary Lou Whitney, Dear Birdie, and the Dam, the same thing. So she's got kind of that foundation mare for Mary Lou on the top and the bottom. So interesting pedigree for her. And she comes out of the maiden race at Churchill that was pretty strong. So I think that they're both, as you said, major threats to the favorite in this race, Happy Soul.
And I have to say, seeing the colors of Mary Lou Whitney winning on opening day, I think would be something very special for a lot of fans and people who love the history of Saratoga and love to see those pedigrees continue and those blue and brown silks once again on the racetrack. And yeah, these kinds of 2-year-old races are really fascinating to me because Happy Soul is the only one in the field with 2 victories, and she has started 3 times, which is also more than anybody else in the field. A lot can happen from start 1 to start 2, and as these horses are figuring things out on the racetrack, and some will improve and some will regress. But I think that's what makes this time of the year the most interesting, is we really get a feel of who these horses are.
Now, Acacia, before I let you go, are there any specific horses or races that you're most looking forward to at the Saratoga meet?
Oh, let's see. Well, I think that the Whitney this year is going to be amazing if everybody shows up in the starting gate
Hmm.
as is planned, with the likes of Country Grammar, Nixco, and Maxfield lining up in the starting gate together. That's probably a weekend that I'm looking forward to most. I've always loved the Diana, and that's opening weekend back to the normal time on the calendar that it is, and we'll be on Big Fox, on Fox proper for our show this weekend covering the Diana. So I think those are probably the 2 weekends I'm most looking forward to. But honestly, David, it's just being back at Saratoga. You never know what kind of performance you're going to see every day, and I'm excited to be part of it once again and to have the fans back as well. And my family's coming up for opening weekend too, so it's going to be a great summer.
Well, we'll be looking forward to watching all of it. I'm sure we'll see you covering it this upcoming weekend for the rest of the meet. So, Acacia, I really appreciate you taking the time to come and join me on this week's podcast.
Absolutely, and best of luck with Saratoga.
Everybody, thanks to Acacia and thanks for listening today. Remember that you can always catch these Timeform US podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch the Timeform US forecast, which will be out coming up this upcoming Friday.